it was. I appreciate that he came on, and I thought it was going to be an interesting discussion, but it turned out he played fast and loose with the truth, and distorted quite a bit of information that were some key points that you had discussed. One of them being the amount of shipwrecks that were discovered. He greatly inflated the amount of shipwrecks that have been discovered. And then you released a video today that went over a lot of this stuff. And one of the things that went over is the oldest shipwreck that we are currently available. It's about 4,000 years old?
About 6,000.
6,000?
The Dokos shipwreck.
But there's nothing left of the ship.
No.
And this is what's important. That, what he was trying to say was that it would be preserved by the cold water. That turns out to not be the truth at all. And that these ships that are 6,000 years old, there's nothing left of the actual boat itself. The only thing that's left is pottery and coins and things of the like.
And especially when you consider the possibility of ships having gone through a cataclysm.
Right.
Not likely to, but there's a more central point than that, which really needed to be brought up by the archaeologists in this, which is that archaeology universally accepts that human beings were seafarers as much as 50,000 years ago. And I put the evidence on this into the video. It's not even in dispute. Like the island of Cyprus, the nearest Turkish coast is about 60 kilometers from there. It's always been surrounded by huge deeps. It's always been an island, even at the peak of the sea level, lowest sea level during the Ice Age. Cyprus was always an island. And yet, there's evidence now that it was settled 14,000 years ago. Certainly 14,000 to 12,500 years ago. It was settled, in other words, during the Ice Age. And these were large planned migrations. When you're going to migrate to an island, you can't just go 2 or 3 people by accident because you'll become extinct. You have to bring in quite a large population, and they reckon that populations of 1,000 or so were being brought across that water, across the ocean, across the Mediterranean Sea to Cyprus near the end of the last Ice Age. But not a single ship has survived to testify to that. Same with Australia. 50,000 years ago, human beings got there, and even at the lowest sea level, they would have had to cross about 90 kilometers of open water in large numbers. And again, no ships have been found to testify to that, yet archaeologists accept that they got there by ship. So to say that we haven't found any ships from the Ice Age is not really evidence about anything.
And if we're finding the oldest ships that we currently are aware of, which is, as you said, about 6,000 years ago, if you tack on another 6,000 years of decay on top of that, what are the odds you're going to find anything?
I think the odds are very, very low.
Now, if we had that evidence and that information when we were confronting Flint, that would have been a very different conversation.
Totally.
But the arrogance in which he distributed that fake information was it's disturbing. It sucks when people just want to win and they don't want to get to the truth.
It does.
And the truth is it's very fascinating. Another thing that was very fascinating that he discussed, I didn't watch your whole video, but it was about seeds. I asked the question, there's a very distinct, noticeable difference between domestic seeds and seeds that are wild. And the difference is the seeds that are wild, they break off easier because it makes sense that it would help them prosper. It would help them be able to spread the seed if it broke off the plant easier. And so they can recognize that. And then when they start using large-scale agriculture, the seeds become more robust and stick to the to the plant, because it makes sense that it would, if you're going to harvest all of the plants and then take the seeds off of it, for the plant to prosper, you would want the seeds to be more robust. So there's these changes. And I said, have they ever noticed a domesticated seed going back and having the characteristics of a wild seed? He said no. Yeah. But that's not true.
That's
either.
not true either.
No.
It's not. It's not true. And the whole notion of the origins of agriculture, I think archaeologists got a great deal more work to do on that. Often, I'm misrepresented as saying that survivors of my supposed lost civilization would have brought crops with them. I think that's most unlikely in a cataclysmic situation. What they brought with them was the knowledge that crops can be domesticated. And it's precisely during the Younger Dryas that we see that shift from undomesticated to domesticated crops in the archaeological record. And what I'm suggesting is that these were people who had already conquered that problem. They'd already solved that problem. They knew it could be done, and they brought that knowledge with them and shared that knowledge with the people that they took refuge amongst. Because I don't think we're looking at a mass migration. I think we're looking at a few survivors who are taking refuge after a global cataclysm.
You know, it's just very unfortunate when you have a debate and one person is an expert and they're not truthful, and it just.
I think it's very bad. I think it's very bad for archaeology.
It is, because it reinforces all the things that you've been saying.
It does. I mean, to be honest, I felt beaten up after that debate. But looking back in retrospect on the whole thing, I think it actually makes the point that we have a very arrogant, very controlling discipline in archaeology, which has established a narrative about the past and which will fight tooth and nail to maintain that narrative, including using dirty tricks. And I think instead of smearing people who talk about the possibility of a lost civilization, or people who even talk about aliens, I think instead of smearing them, archaeology should understand why people are asking those questions. And people are asking those questions because they're not satisfied with what archaeology is offering. It's not providing a nurturing, satisfying resolution to many of the problems that come from the past. And that's what drives me is curiosity about anomalies in the past. I'm often misrepresented as saying that somehow I've proved that a lost civilization existed, and I don't claim to have proved that. What I do say is, join me on this journey. There are mysteries in the past. Let's see if they're explained by archaeology or if they're not explained. And I found quite a number that are not explained by archaeology, and that's particularly to do with astronomical alignments, with traditions that are shared all around the world. It's to do with things that archaeologists by and large don't study.
This episode of the Joe Rogan Experience is brought to you by Call of Duty. You know, when a new Call of Duty drops, everyone's trying to find a way to squeeze in those extra hours of gameplay. I get it. Life is busy, but sometimes you just...
Hey, Joe, it's the Replacer. Yeah, no, you. Hey, I'm gonna take it from here so you can enjoy some Call of Duty Black Ops 6. Great. Now listen up, folks. Life can be chaotic, but you shouldn't have to miss out on the latest Call of Duty just because you've got, I don't know, responsibilities. That's where I come in. I will handle the boring stuff like work, chores, even podcast ads. So you can dive right into the fight. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 is out October 25th. So dive in because I've got your back. Remember, I replace you play. It's that simple.
Man, the Replacer always gets it done. Seriously though, if you're hooked on Call of Duty, this is your time to jump in. Head over to callofduty.com/Black Ops 6 to get in the game. Call of Duty Black Ops 6. Pre-order now. Well, it's also one of the things that's fascinating is just even with conventional archaeology, the dates keep getting pushed further and further back.
Further and further back.
And this is one of the things, the White Sands, New Mexico stuff that you have on episode 1.
That's right. Which is, by the way, White Sands. Have you been there?
No, I haven't.
What an incredible, ethereal, otherworldly place. And Alamogordo is sitting right in the middle of that. This is where they did the nuclear tests and the trinitite, which was created there. And there's gypsum sand. It's not normal. It's just the most amazing place. And there, yes, they found human footprints dating back more than 23,000 years.
What do they think that environment was like 22,000 years ago?
Well, it would still have been like that. It would have been gypsum dunes then in that place. Otherwise,
gypsum dunes.
They wouldn't have left the footprints. I'm not exactly sure why the gypsum is there, but there it is.
Is that the same stuff they use for like gypsum board for construction?
I reckon so, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a very fine, very white sand, and it just goes on forever, and the dunes are sculpted and massive and huge. And we had an amazing time there.
So it looked incredible. So they found footprints there, and these are absolutely human footprints, and there's not just a few of them, there's thousands of them.
There's thousands of them, and what's amazing when you actually see the footprints is you can see the interactions between the human beings and animals. You can see that somebody is reacting to a giant sloth which has suddenly turned around, and the person who's behind it suddenly turns around as well.
Wow.
There's mammoth footprints overlaying human footprints, and then human footprints overlaying those, and it goes down for meters under the ground. So you have a very deep stratification of these impressions that have been left behind by our ancestors and by animals that are now completely extinct. Mammoths and mastodons went extinct during the Younger Dryas, but there are their footprints from 23,000 years ago, side by side with the footprints of human beings. It's very intimate to see a footprint, to see those 5 toes, to see the heel mark, to see sometimes a child walking beside a mother. That's there in the record as well.
Wow.
It's quite something special, and it opens the door. Archaeology has been very reluctant to accept a much older peopling of the Americas than previously was held. It was held for a long time, that it was about 13,000 years ago. They've abandoned that now. They did cling on tooth and nail for decades, but that's been abandoned. It's accepted that human beings came here long before 13,000 years ago. And White Sands is one of the places which provides just absolute, definite, irrefutable evidence of that they were here 23,000 years ago. But we don't know yet how long before that they were here. This is part of the problem. I often remember a site called the Cerruti Mastodon site in San Diego. I went to see the exhibits are in the San Diego Natural History Museum, and I talked with the expert there, Dr. Tom Desmarais, and they are convinced that they are looking at human traces there. It was a butchering of a mastodon, but the way the bones were broken and the marrow was extracted, they don't see any other way that this could have been done except by human beings. And the thing is, it's 130,000 years old, not 23,000 years old, not 13,000 years old, but 130,000 years old. And this opens the possibility that human beings have been in the Americas before they were in Europe. And that becomes...
That's crazy.
That's a door that opens all kinds of possibilities which have been neglected. I think that the prejudice is that the Americas were only settled very late in the human story led archaeology to not have their eye on the possibility of what happens if they were here earlier.
Right.
And they tend not to look to that.
Well, what I was going to ask is, as they're digging deeper and deeper and they're finding these footprints in White Sands, New Mexico, is there a possibility that they could dig deeper still and find things that are even older?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
How do they know where to go?
It was found by accident. The first footprints were found completely by accident, and they were found by indigenous local people who alerted the National Park Service to them. And we have a number of indigenous spokespeople who speak to the White Sands mystery and how it feels for them, the emotional feeling of seeing the footprints of their ancestors from 23,000 years ago. The thing is that the dunes are constantly shifting, and sometimes the footprints will be covered up, and then wind will reveal them again. And they're fragile; they can be easily destroyed and wiped off. And in a way, it's a miracle that they've survived. But to see the stride of a mammoth, you see how far apart those huge footpads are. And to realize this thing was alive, this thing existed on this planet, human beings interacted with it. It's very compelling evidence for an earlier settlement of the Americas.
There is some evidence that human beings came across the Bering Land Bridge.
Oh yeah.
So that probably means there was people already here and people came here from Asia.
Almost certainly. And the way the evidence is looking, it's most likely that South America was settled first, before North America was settled. And that raises all kinds of questions. And we've gone into this in Season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, primarily to do with the DNA evidence of a direct connection between the peoples of New Guinea and Australia and the peoples of certain tribes in South America. And that's very ancient, very old DNA evidence in South America, but also to do with archaeological archaeological sites like Monteverde. I did bring up the issue of Tom Dillehay the last time we were on when Flint was here. And Tom Dillehay, who found Monteverde, who excavated Monteverde in South America and realized that it was plus 14,000 years old and therefore a lot older than what was then accepted as the model for the first peoples in North America. When he put that idea forward, he was eviscerated by his colleagues in archaeology. It took them a decade to come round to accepting that actually he was right. And there are many other sites in South America going back 30+ thousand years. They're all controversial because they conflict with an existing model. But I think instead of clinging on to existing models, I think that's one of the problems with archaeology, is this territoriality, this kind of control of the past. I think instead of doing that, it would be nicer if archaeology was a little bit more welcoming, a little bit more open to new and different ideas.
Unfortunately, that's just the thing when people are supposed experts in a subject and someone comes along that's also been studying it, but from an untraditional perspective.
Yeah.
People reject that.
I've come to the point, and I'm going to say some strong words here.
Get crazy around that, John.
I've come to the point where I believe that some archaeologists, not all of them, this problem is with a small number of archaeologists, but they're extremely vocal. I think what we're looking at is a kind of abuse of power. Archaeologists have a power. They are the official spokespeople for the past, and they use that power to slap down any point of view that doesn't agree with theirs. So I think that there's an abuse of power there, and at the same time, there's not a realization that that's happening, because the mindset that drives it is the feeling that members of the general public are unable to decide things for themselves. This is the arrogance of archaeology, that they feel that they have to tell people what to think about the past, and they underestimate the intelligence of the public and the ability of the public to discern, to make choices between different possibilities about the past. They think that archaeologists seem to think that only one possibility of the past must be considered by the general public, and that's their possibility. And it reminds me a lot of the heresy hunters back in the 16th century. You know, the people who disagreed with their point of view got burned at the stake. Well, you don't get burned at the stake today, but you can get lynched by a mob of archaeologists.
Well, it's also
online.
the same thing that we saw during COVID with medical experts that disagreed with the narrative. It's the same thing.
It is absolutely the same thing.
When you take esteemed professors and doctors and physicians and you cast them into this kook label because they disagree with the narrative that the medical establishment is pushing, and then they turn out to be correct, which most of them did, you see the same patterns. It's just power. Yeah. It's just power and people that have their identity wrapped up in them being the ones that have access to the actual information.
Yeah.
They don't want it to be distributed by some guy on Netflix.
That's right. It's
even though you've been probably studying it more than them.
Well,
certainly studying particular aspects of it.
That's the other thing I noticed, which was the sneering attitude towards me. They talk about my wife started taking tourist photos of the places that we've been to. Well, we've never been anywhere as tourists. We haven't had a holiday for 20 years. But the working trips that we do are very intense.
Your wife's an amazing photographer. Like, who cares if she takes tourist photos? The photos are incredible. They're of real sites that are very pertinent and very interesting.
That's right.
The whole criticizing amazing photographs is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Like, why would you criticize amazing photographs of ruins that are perplexing?
Yeah, I know.
How could you? But how could you find even an area where you want people to agree with you?
It's part of this desperate search to say we archaeologists know everything.
Yeah.
And we must discredit in any way we can anybody who has anything opposite to say.
It's an unfortunate human characteristic. That it happens in everything. You see it in martial arts, you see it in science, you see it in everything.
This reliance on experts, I get it. I would like the pilot of my plane to be an expert pilot. I don't want him to be an amateur.
Yeah.
But I don't think that archaeologists and aircraft pilots can be compared in that sense. Archaeology is a much more interpretive discipline. An aircraft pilot is not really interpreting situations that much. He knows what to do in such situations. Archaeologists are interpreting the past, and yet they seem to get very upset by other interpretations of the past that are offered that don't agree with theirs. And this this is the problem of expertise in our society. Yes, expertise is very important. It's incredibly useful. But we should not place all our faith and trust in experts.
Right.
We need to liberate our own consciousness and freely think about things and make our own decisions about things and resist absolutely being told what to think.
Well, the problem is these experts are human beings, and human beings have very distinct behavior traits that they exhibit, especially when they're in a position of power and prestige.
Yeah.
And they like to hold that, and it feels good for them to be a person that looks down upon the people that don't know better and tell them what to do and tell them what to think. And when you're doing that with something like art, look, if you're doing that with something like mathematics, and someone's a mathematical expert, math is a very specific and precise science.
Yeah.
It's very specific.
Yeah.
Archaeology is like, who fucking knows what's out there?
Exactly.
Because you haven't searched everything.
No.
It's not possible to. And as we develop more these fascinating technologies like LiDAR, where you have the ability, ground penetrating radar, all these different things where you can look into the soil itself and find things that aren't visible on the surface, see them through trees, see them through that, we're going to find more, and obviously in Brazil they have done, in the Amazon they have done that.
Well, that was part of our adventure with season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse. Was working with a really professional team in Brazil, led by an archaeologist, Marty Parsonen from the University of Helsinki, and a geographer from Brazil, Alceu Ranzi. Alceu, years ago, was the first person who noticed that there are these huge geometrical structures emerging out of the Amazon jungle, and he noticed it on a flight on a commercial aircraft in an area that happened to have been cleared by local farmers for planting crops. That there was this massive geometrical earthwork there, and that. He actually coined the term geoglyphs for these because he compared them in some ways with the Nazca lines, which again are really only visible from the air. You get suddenly the massive scope and extent of these things, and it's same with the geoglyphs in the Amazon. And here's the thing: the ones we know about up till now we largely know about them because of these tragic clearances of the Amazon rainforest, which is a maybe short-term economic gain, but is a long-term really not a very good idea. But now with LiDAR, it's possible to find these things without damaging any rainforest at all. And we had a LiDAR expert with us, and you can fly LiDAR off a drone now.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's a pretty hefty drone, but they can fly anywhere. And we found, I say we, it was actually the LiDAR expert who found. He found you can see the edge of the rainforest where the clearances stop and the rainforest hasn't yet been interfered with. And then he flies over there, and within a matter of hours, he's found multiple more of these structures, several.
That are deep in the rainforest.
Covered completely. And LiDAR allows him to see through the canopy and to see what's underneath it without damaging it. And there are these huge earthworks. And this raises the question, how much more is there in the Amazon to find, especially which even the archaeologists who are most reluctant are now willing to accept that the Amazon had a huge population before the Spanish conquest.
It's just so wild. That's such a shift.
Millions, cities, a whole different way of life, a whole different kind of civilization from the one that we have today, one that lived in a man-made garden, which is what the Amazon really and truly is, and lived in harmony with that.
That's an interesting thing, too. We've talked about that before, but for people who've never heard those other podcasts, they've determined that the Amazon rainforest is at least partially man-made.
Definitely. They've determined that because of the preponderance of trees